So you spent 10 years at IBM, or roughly 10 years, which by many people's standards is very impressive. But obviously you also took a lot out of that experience. Were there aspects of IBM that you think made it possible to progress and develop other skill sets? And maybe if somebody here was looking for an executive role longer term, what should they sort of look for in an earlier job?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one thing that IBM did really well was they focused on leadership development at the company, and they'd identify people early in their careers that they thought had potential for leadership roles, and then they'd make sure that their careers were moving at a rate and pace that they stayed challenged and stayed engaged. And that's something that I really benefited from. When I got to IBM, I thought I'd stay there for probably 2 years and then leave and go to a client or an industry that I had grown to know that I thought was interesting. But just it's kind of uncanny at IBM. Every time I was starting to get a little restless and felt like I was ready for the next challenge, I was moved into the next role or the next challenge. And so they did a really good job of that. And that's a lesson that I think is important, especially when you're, managing really smart, ambitious people, right? It's something we try to do at Core as well, is keep people moving and keep them challenged, because there's nothing worse than a smart person who's feeling bored, right, or underutilized. As a company, that means they're going to leave, right? As an employer, it also means you're not getting the most out of them, right? It's you're not keeping them developed, and obviously it's not good for anybody. So it's an important lesson I learned at IBM, but it also requires you to kind of have an open mind, because a lot of times they'll say, well, I'd like you to go do this, and it's like, well, okay, I don't know a lot about that, but I'll trust you and see how it goes. And I was just fortunate that I got some good opportunities there.
Did you have to push for those opportunities, or were they brought to you?
Almost every time they're brought to me. Advice that I got early in my career, which I think is really good, is just focus on doing the best job that you can possibly do in the role that you're in, and good things will naturally come from that if you're working at a well-managed business. And I got that advice early in my IBM career, and I tried to adhere to it, and I think it served out well. And again, a positive lesson I've tried to bring to Core, right? Like I don't respond well to the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? But on the other side of the coin, I really try to be proactive about promoting people or bringing people along in their career when they're ready for it, but not when they're lobbying for it, but that's hard work for management, right? That's something that you really need to stay focused on and stay out in front of. It's easier to do when you're in a fast growing business like we have been. It's harder to do if you're in a business that's not growing or God forbid declining. So we've benefited from that, but that's been my approach, at least.
So before we move on to your time at Core Informatics, were there any takeaways either from your time working in politics or while you're at IBM that you think prepared you particularly well for management and leadership roles in a startup?
It's a good question. I guess at the end, it's the common denominator in all these things is working with people, right? In all sectors, knowing how to collaborate with people, knowing how to understand and empathize with what other people are, what's important to them or what they're concerned about. I think that's something that, frankly, going all the way back, I learned a lot from Rosa. I think I learned from my parents a lot, but I learned from Rosa. She was amazing. It still is amazing at that. But just, understanding people and knowing how to work with people. It's a little cliched probably, but honestly, I think that's the biggest thing.
Is that something that, as a manager, you can teach other people, or is that something that they either have or they don't have?
Yeah, no, I think you can definitely learn to get better at that. I feel like I still have a lot to learn. It's one of those things that you can spend the rest of your life getting better at, I think. I've been really fortunate to have some really incredible managers during my career that I really kind of look back and try to emulate some of the things that they've done, but certainly I make mistakes like everybody else. But yeah, no, I think it can, like most things in life, I think it can absolutely be learned if you put your mind to it.
So you moved on to Core Informatics, as I mentioned before, a really early employee there. How did that come to be? And along those lines, both why did you decide to join, but also why do you think the team there wanted to bring you on?
Sure. So to answer that question, I need to tell you like a little bit of the history of the company of Core Informatics, because in some respects, the guys who should be sitting up here tonight are our two co-founders, Anthony Uzo and Jim Gregory. They are the ones who founded the company back in 2005. They were both former lab scientists at working together at a publicly listed biotech company here in Brantford called Neurogen Corporation. If anyone's been around the area for a long time, may have heard of that. Late 90s, early 2000s, kind of like a high flyer. And they kind of transitioned from scientific benchwork into software development, and they ended up writing a lot of the software that Neurogen used to run its operations. And through that set of experiences, they learned a lot about how to use software to solve hard scientific problems. They also learned a lot about how deficient the commercial software market is serving scientists generally. And so they took a lot of those learnings and decided that they were going to go found this company. And they quit, very comfortable, high-paying jobs to start Core from nothing. They literally started off in a garage. It's also very cliched, but very true. At a time when they had, newborn kids and mortgages and like really, really impressive level of confidence in their ability to make this successful. They signed their first customer with not a line of software code written, pure vaporware, but it was a colleague that they'd worked with before at Neurogen who knew what they could do and what their capabilities were and trusted them to build, version 1 of the product, for his company, and knowing that they'd then go on to build a company around that. And they were off and running. And so they took no outside funding for a long time, bootstrapping the company. In the enterprise software industry, business software industry, it's pretty common for customers to pay annually in advance for your software. So you license it on an annual basis and pay for it in advance. So it's actually a great way to get your customers to finance your growth by paying you up front for use of your software. And that's what they did. So they'd sell another contract, and then that enabled them to hire another employee and continue to kind of steadily build the company up like that. And so to get to your question of how I came into the picture here, basically 8 years in to this journey, kind of bootstrapping, growing steadily every year, making money, building up a base of referenceable customers. Jim and Anthony got to the point where they recognized that they had, very strong and differentiated software platform, that cloud computing, which they'd built the company in Amazon Web Services. But at this point in time, cloud computing was starting to really become mainstream, even in more conservative industries like the scientific, biopharma industry that we primarily serve. And that they had a real opportunity to scale the business up and to bring it more broadly to the market than bootstrapping allows, where you're adding employees one at a time as you add new customers. But they also recognized that scaling up a business was not something that they was necessarily going to be the best use of their time, that they had a lot of experience in. They're scientists and they're software engineers, and they love working at the intersection of science and software. But a lot of the aspects of growing and scaling a business was not really their thing. So they knew they wanted to find an outside CEO to help them do that. So as it turns out, I had known Anthony, one of the two co-founders, since we were kids. So he grew up in Brantford as well. We're in the same age, and we kind of came up through school together. So we'd known each other for a long time. We'd stayed in touch, although our careers and our lives went in different directions. But I happened to run into Anthony around this time that he and Jim were starting to think about bringing an outside CEO, and he asked me if I'd be interested in taking a look at that. And so that's what led to me joining Core.
Or during that earlier period, were there times when it was a challenge to come in as an outside manager of the founders?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, when you join a company where you're not one of the original founders, right? There's in this case 8 years, right, worth of work that's been done and decisions that have been made, right, that you step into, and you have to embrace that, right? Because none of that's going to change. All you have control over is what you're going to do going forward. But you're also working with people who are incredibly talented, who have a vision about where they want to see the product go as well. We've been very fortunate that I think the three of us make a very complementary team, though. I think that's something to look for if you guys ever find yourself in a position like this, is if you find that the people you're going to be working very closely with like that have very overlapping skills, that might be tough. But if the skills are not as overlapping but very complementary, that might be a good fit where people kind of understand the division of labor and who's going to focus on what. And, we've got a very good setup that way.
Cool. Before we move further, would you mind giving those of us that don't know the software platform and what you sell a little bit of an overview, but also if you could talk about sort of how it's transitioned from when you first got there to what it is today?
Absolutely. So our software helps scientists generate insights that helps them get new drugs to market, new consumer products to market that improve human health and our quality of life. So the way we do that is we give scientists a cloud-based data management platform that they can use to collect their data, to move workflows and experiments through their lab, and to analyze that data and help inform decision-making around which molecules or compounds might have the most potential to become therapeutics that can help cure or treat diseases, for example. So in modern science, you generate huge amounts of data now with robotics and instruments. And so managing all of that data and really driving productivity in the lab, now requires software to really do that at scale. Most customers will start off managing this data in like Excel spreadsheets. And that they quickly start drowning in Excel spreadsheets. And that's oftentimes when they'll show up in our pipeline. So, so we're all about helping scientists, become more efficient, more effective in their, really, really important work.
So you mentioned when you arrived, I think it had been determined that it was time to raise funding. How did you go about finding it? How did you know how much to raise and where to look?
Sure. So part of the deal that we talked about before I joined was that, to really scale this thing up, we thought it would make sense to go out and raise some outside capital for the first time to enable us to hire ahead of the next order, essentially. And so, pretty shortly after I joined, I started that process up, and that process is very time consuming. Who here has raised outside funding before? Yeah. So if you've been through it, you know the joys. It's like any kind of sales funnel where you start off with a very wide list of people you're hoping to target, and that list kind of very narrow, quickly kind of narrows down where initially most people say they're not interested. It's not a fit for sector reasons or, the size of the investment they like to make versus what you're looking to raise, whatever it might be. But it's very time consuming, right? And it's very intense. But we were fortunate that, we were growing fast. So we had a good story to tell. I think that the things that venture investors are typically looking for, we kind of were able to check, most of those boxes. And we had, very strong interest from several VCs who wanted to invest in our A round. And we closed that in I guess it was May or June of 2014. The other thing I would say is, Lindy Lee still here? Yes. She is. So the other thing we did kind of in parallel to that was we approached the state of Connecticut, the DECD, to see if they'd be interested in supporting our growth as well, because we'd observed that under the leadership of the governor and Catherine Smith, and Lindy Lee is part of the DECD team as well, they'd been doing some really innovative things about putting the state's balance sheet to work to help stimulate job growth and innovation in Connecticut, particularly with fast-growing technology companies that tend to create relatively high-paying jobs that have a lot of kind of multiplier effects into other industries as well. So we thought that was pretty cool. And so we had pitched the state, and they were receptive to allowing us to participate in one of their funding programs as well. So we did in 2014, we did both a $5 million Series A that was led by Launch Capital and a $3 million deal with the state of Connecticut, which was the mix of mostly a loan, low interest, partially forgivable loan, and grant as well. Which I will just say before I forget that when we were acquired, our acquirer, they like to acquire companies debt-free, so they wanted us to pay off the DECD loan. So we paid back every penny plus interest. So the state made a profit on their investment in us, and in the process managed to catalyze, a lot of additional job growth. And post-acquisition, we're staying here in Connecticut. So it's a real, I think, a real huge success story for DECD. A lot of times they'll end up in the newspaper for the company, the bets they make that don't pay off. But I like to point out that this is one that paid off big time. And we'll always be appreciative of Lindy Lee and Catherine and the team.
Was the Series B with investor with the Connecticut Footprint as well?
Yeah, as it turns out, it was. So we in our Series B round, about a year later, we also had a lot of interest from both outside of the state, but the firm that we ended up selecting to lead our Series B was Oak, who are based in Greenwich, actually, led by Annie Lamont and Andrew Adams, and really, really great team. We love the fact that they were local, but that's not really why we selected them. It was more because they have had a huge track record of success coming into companies that were at about our stage at that time and helping lead them through periods of significant growth. Many of their healthcare IT type companies to IPOs, companies like Athena Health, Castlight, Benefit Focus. So they'd had a ton of success. We ended up going a different route than IPO a lot sooner than we had anticipated, but that was something that we saw as a lot of value in working with them.
Do you think raising money from VCs with the Connecticut Footprint affected your path in any way? I've heard a lot of people say they get pressured to move to a bigger city, often around raising money.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were always clear with everyone in the venture financings we did, in the acquisition that we did, that we weren't moving anywhere. We, both Jim and Anthony, our co-founders, myself, a lot of our leadership team, we have very deep roots in Connecticut. We love it here. And so we were just pretty clear, like, we're not going anywhere. So if that's a problem for you, good to know. We'll go our separate ways, right? But aside from the fact that we've got roots here, we actually have found growing our business in Connecticut to be a pretty significant strategic advantage for us. So we're a software company, which means our most important raw materials, software engineers, right? So we have two of our very talented engineers and joining us here, Ryan and Brian. If we were based in the typical places a company like ours would be based, in Silicon Valley or in New York or in Boston, we'd be in a war for talent with Google and with Facebook and with the 10 greatest software recruiting organizations in the history of the universe, right? And that's tough. I mean, these guys could probably still go get jobs there too. They're really smart, right? But we offer things here in Connecticut that I think you don't always get in those big cities, right? In terms of quality of life. When you get to that point in your life, the ability to own a little bit more house for your dollar, send your kids to public schools, right? There's like a outdoor lifestyle here that a lot of us really enjoy. And so being a little bit of a bigger fish in a smaller pond has actually been really helpful to us, being based here in the New Haven area. We told that story to investors as well. I think a lot of times when companies get pressured to move to Boston or New York, it's because there's a belief that to really be able to scale at the rate that they need to be there to hire at the rate and pace they need. But I think we've defied, or maybe we're a counterexample of that belief, because we've been very fortunate to attract a ton of great talent, I think, on our team.
Did most of your talent already live here, or did you bring people in from other areas?
Yeah, it's a real mix. So we have a number of people who work with us here in Branford who did kind of have roots in Connecticut. There's a number of people who came to Connecticut to go to school and then kind of stuck around. We've also moved people into the state, not that many, but a few. But for the most part, it's been people that have some sort of Connecticut tie, either from growing up here or from coming here for school.
Related to that, were there any challenges you faced because you were based here? I know you have offices outside of New Haven. Was that necessity from a sales perspective or from other strategic perspectives?
Yeah, we have small sales offices in Boston and La Jolla, Southern California. Those offices are very small. They're like co-working spaces, like the Grove, really. Like, we'll have a little office and a co-working space. And it's mostly for our local employees to have somewhere to go to get out of the house. And then it's also, especially as we're a small company and growing, you want to make it look like you're bigger than you actually are, right? So these big companies that are making really kind of mission critical bets on you, they want to know you've got the scale to support them. You're going to be around for a while. So having multiple offices definitely creates the the aura of, size and stability, right? So there was kind of the fringe benefit of that, but it was mostly to give our remote employees, a place to get out of their home offices from time to time.
So it seems like every day things were going awesome and everything was shooting upwards. Where was the biggest challenge you faced in your tenure?
What do you think, guys? Has every day been totally awesome? Liars. Yeah, no, look, I mean, anyone who's worked in a startup before knows you have good days and bad days, right? And that's part of the deal. I mean, we've been very fortunate to have a lot more good days than bad days, but we've definitely had challenges at times, right? We've lost deals to clients. We've had clients who left us. We've had challenges getting software releases out the door. I mean, all the usual stuff, right? And sometimes it's really disappointing because you work really hard on something, you don't get the outcome that you want. But part of being part of a startup is accepting that, right, and not letting the highs and the lows control your life and your approach too much, and trying to find the straight line through those curves and stay focused on that. And I think we've done that pretty well overall.
So in March you were acquired. How did that come up?
Sure. So Thermo Fisher acquired us. They had been a customer of ours for about 3 years prior to acquiring us. And that's, but also from my experience working at IBM, where we acquired a lot of software companies, it's a very common way that acquisitions get introduced to their acquirers. They're first a customer or a business partner. And that was our case as well. So we had been working with actually a couple of different divisions of Thermo Fisher, serving their scientists for a while. So we got to know a lot of their team. But what really kind of kicked the snowball kind of rolling down the hill on the acquisition was a meeting that we had in November out on the West Coast at their Southern California site with their chief technology officer, who we were talking to about. They had a cloud initiative that they were working on, and we wanted to see, based on our customer relationship, if there were ways to partner with them and generate leads as a result of some of what they were doing. So we had this really great chat with the CTO, at the end of which he basically looked at us and he said, "Would you guys be open to being acquired?" And we were like, "Okay, well, it's not why we were here for the meeting, but we could continue that discussion if that was something you wanted to talk about." I mean, we had always thought we were going to keep at it for a number of years further and go for an IPO. We really like being independent. But when a company like Thermo Fisher, which is one of the major players in our industry, raises that question, you have to pay attention to it, right? You have to play it out. So they are a very acquisitive company, and when they decide they want to look at a potential acquisition, they do it very efficiently. And we went from that conversation on the West Coast to, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks later, including a wrap over the Christmas holiday where nothing was really happening. We had a letter of intent from them I think the last day of January, and the deal closed on March 2nd, like a little less than 5 weeks later. So really, really fast. Not the usual experience that most people have. So, if you end up in the acquisition dance, don't feel bad if it doesn't happen that fast. It's really, really rare. But it was, a combination of them having a very strong desire for what we had and having a really strong strategic fit with their strategy and where they wanted to go. We also were fortunate to have kind of inbound interest from some other big strategic companies in the industry. So we had a little bit of competition there, which is always helpful to kind of help make things go fast and to get you the types of outcomes that you're looking for. But overall, it worked well because I think there's a really good kind of cultural fit between our company and theirs, which enabled the negotiations and the discussions to go really well. And the fact that our company overall was very clean from a diligence perspective, like no lawsuits, no really aged receivables or IP issues or anything like that. So that's the kind of stuff that enables diligence to go fast too. So it's a very, very short process.
So you've been on the other side of the table at IBM. One of the questions that frequently comes up is this something we could build, or could we go acquire somebody else? What is it about what you built at Core Informatics, either in the product, sales team, engineering, that actually made them say, "Hey, we can't do this ourselves. We need to go out and acquire"?
Yeah, so I mean, consider that Jim and Anthony have been working on this thing, with an ever-growing team for at that point 11 years, and the platform's pretty powerful. I mean, it can do a lot, and they come from the scientific domain, and they appreciate that, right? They recognize that. They did have some internal discussions, we know, about build versus buy. They had estimated that to build something similar with a very large engineering team focused just on that was going to take them 2 to 3 years minimum. And then they also knew that if that's what they were estimating, it was probably going to take them twice that long in reality. And they just didn't want to wait that long. They know the market's moving fast, and they have the balance sheet to be able to do acquisitions, so they just wanted to, get after it more quickly.
A couple more quick ones, and then we'll open up to Q&A. If you could go back in time and give your 25-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
That's a tough question. I don't know. I think there's something I've tried to do throughout is just to have a really open mind about things and just to be open to the serendipity of life, right? Like life is, it presents you with all sorts of interesting challenges, from directions that you don't always expect them. And, I think when I was 25, I may have had a little bit more clear view about, I think this is where I want to go in my career. So I'm going to kind of map out these steps. But I quickly realized, that that's not the way it's probably going to work. And it's best just to kind of sit back, focus on doing the best possible job in the role you're in, and then just let kind of the randomness and chance of life kind of present interesting opportunities as they come up. And I think that approach is a good one.
Another advice question, this time for a hypothetical somebody else. You have a friend that calls you and says, "Hey, I'm going to this I'm thinking about going to this 15-person startup. It worked out great for you. What should I know?" What would your answer be to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, my initial instincts on that type of thing is go for it, right? Like I think entrepreneurs and I think building new and innovative things is like the most important thing that goes on in our economy, right? And so I have massive, massive respect for people who take a lot of risk in their careers and their personal lives to try to start something and build something new. Recognizing that just the statistics are against you, right? The odds are that it's not going to work out, right? What the stats are, 90% of startups fail or something like that, right? So the deck is stacked against you, but still people do it. And I love that. I think it's fantastic. But that said, it's important that if you do think about doing this, number one, I've seen lots of people write and say that it's very important to have a co-founder. I think that's really true. I think doing something as hard as this by yourself could be really, really tough. And people have done it, right? But I think having a co-founder is great. The other thing I'd say is make sure you pick a problem to work on or an industry to work in that you're really passionate about, because you're probably signing up for a 10-year journey, right? And if it's something that you're not really passionate about, that's gonna suck fast, right? So make sure that you love it, because if you love it and you love the problems that you're solving and the types of clients you're working with and the problems you're solving, then it's not work, right? Then it's just fun. It's a challenge. So, I wasn't going to leave IBM to join some startup that was working on the next instant messaging app, right? Like, to me, that's just not exciting. There's a lot of them out there, incremental improvements along the way, fine. To join a company that has the potential to really transform how science is conducted and help get new therapeutics to market faster that might save the life of someone I love someday, like, that's exciting. Like, that gets me out of bed every day with like a lot of purpose. So I think that's important as well.
One more. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? It's not advice, but it was a saying that my late father-in-law would always say to me. My late father-in-law was someone I had immense respect for. Grew up from absolutely nothing, built a successful career as a banker, kind of starting off at the lowest levels and rising up through the ranks. Really, kind of classic American success story. And he always had this saying, he said that, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And I think those are good words to live by, right? Like, there's so much luck in life, right? And in work, right? The landing the
the customer at the right time, or getting the right person to join your team, or just things that can go wrong that are just completely out of your control that can send you off on a tailspin. There's so much luck out there, but there's some things that you can control, right? You can make a choice that you're going to work harder than everybody else, right? And regardless of what else happens around you, there could be another competitor with a better product, or whatever it might be. But if you're committed to outworking somebody or a competitor, or just in absolute terms, just working really hard at what you're doing, I think you have a lot better chance to be lucky in life and to be successful. So I think that's something that doesn't take any intelligence or smarts or anything, but something every one of us can control.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks for coming, first of all, for you and your team as well. So when you were looking at other positions, were you looking at other startups? And if so, what made you choose this one?
Yeah, so I was 10, 11 years in my IBM career. I'd gotten to the point where, and this is other advice I'd gotten early in my career, is like, keep an eye on what your boss does. Because when you get to the point where you don't want your boss's job anymore, then it's time to start thinking about working somewhere else, right? Unless you can just stay in the role you're in for the rest of your career and be happy with that. That's also fine then. But I got to the point where I actually, I wasn't that excited about my boss's career anymore. And so, back to what I said before, I thought I'd start for 2 years and then go do something kind of more, company-centric or entrepreneurial. So I was like, all right, time to do that. And so I had started kind of networking around the New Haven area. I knew this is where I wanted to come back to after working at IBM. I was in London and New York and Washington, D.C. I was away for a long time. But I had 2 young kids, and my wife and I decided that we wanted to stop moving our family and let our kids grow up in one place. So we knew we wanted to come back to Connecticut. This is where we love it. This is where we wanted our kids to grow up. So I started kind of networking around the New Haven region, and there's actually a handful of startups that I think were at the right stage where I could potentially have helped them. But this one was the best fit, both in terms of knowing one of the co-founders, which is great, having a lot of passion and excitement about the industry and the clients that we get to serve in this market, and really believing in the trajectory of the business too, right? Like I saw at IBM a lot of headwinds, for some of these legacy IT companies that were really struggling with cloud computing and really struggling with a lot of the big kind of macro changes going on in enterprise software. Whereas I saw Core on the right side of those trends with a lot of tailwind, right? And that to me was what, I kind of saw, all the right ingredients there for, really breakout growth. So those were really the 3 factors that made it a pretty easy decision to come join Core.
Great comments, first of all. Really enjoyed that. It seems to me like there's an overemphasis on getting funded for new startups now instead of selling stuff. And you said something really interesting at the beginning of your comments about how SaaS provides a great opportunity to kind of grow based on customer acquisition. So based on that, when is the right time for specifically a software startup to start looking for funding? How do you know you're at that point? And secondly, why is there such an emphasis, I think, at very early stages now of looking for funding instead of customer acquisition?
It's a great question, and I really don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to this. I think it depends so much on the specific circumstances of the business, the market, the team, right? So I don't mean to duck the question a little bit, but the thing that I would say that I think is very consistent is no matter which approach you take, starting off with a really strong focus on customers is critical no matter what you're doing. I think where a lot of companies go off the rails is getting internally enamored with an idea or something that they find kind of intellectually interesting, but not getting that real world feedback, right? Not feeling the cold wind of the marketplace blowing every day, telling you what's working or what's not working, what's creating value, what's not creating value, what a customer is willing to pay money for versus what they're willing to use on a, for free on a trial basis, right? All of these types of interactions provide very, very valuable data to you as a manager to think about, decisions you want to make. So that's the most important thing. And then I think from there, look, if you can get your customers to fund your growth, like Jim and Anthony did for 8 years, That's phenomenal, because you then, if you do want to raise money down the road like we did, you can raise it on much more favorable terms and retain much higher percentage ownership in the company as a result of that. That said, the other side of the coin is, Jim and Anthony were, they were constrained in their growth for that period of time, right? They could have grown the top line faster without question, and maybe gotten to that exit event sooner, but maybe with less of the company, maybe, who knows, right? It's just such a hard thing to know. So, my advice is, if you find yourself in that situation, is, talk to as many people as you can who've been through it before, and just help them ask you questions about the pros and the cons to kind of think it through. But beware of people with one size fits all answers. Just generally in life, I'm very skeptical of those types of things. So I don't want to become one myself.
So I just had a quick question about, I know you talked a lot about the acquisition phase. Was that, because you made it sound like it was just sort of like it came to you, but had you ever gone seeking for acquisitions before that, or did it come up before and you decided not to for whatever reasons? And what sort of like made you turn into, you said you liked the independence, but you didn't say, like, what was the deciding factors besides the financials? Was there anything else that helped you bridge that?
Yeah, also a great question. So, we were not out seeking this, right? As I mentioned, like they brought it up with us. Now, that said, in fairness, I mean, we observed the industry, right? And we knew there was probably, 12 companies, right, that were where there was probably a strategic fit, where we could be a good complement to their portfolio, where they were big enough where they could afford to buy us, because at this point we'd gotten to a size and multiples in our industry where it wasn't going to be cheap. And as you keep growing, right, that number of potential companies shrinks, as your price goes up. Also, sometimes some of those companies will make acquisitions of competitors of ours, and now they're off the market, right? So, this was kind of the trade-offs that we were wrestling with a little bit too, of like, when is the timing right on this kind of thing? And, in this case, it was just, we kind of had the gut feeling that this was the right company, the right time. There were just a lot of things that came together in the right way. It came together very easy. It was a company that was always, as I mentioned, in kind of the top of the list of those that if we were going to get acquired someday, this is likely one of the companies that would do it. And as we got to know that company, both as a customer and then in much more detail through the diligence process, right? When someone's doing due diligence on you, you're spending a lot of time working with them. You see the questions they're asking. You see how they react when you tell them something that's not perfect the way they want it to be, right? Like, you kind of get a real feel for people and what their company's culture is like. And as we got to know the folks from Thermo Fisher, we really loved working with them. Like, they really saw the world in a similar way that we did. They're very kind of pragmatic and down to earth, just like a really good feel to it. So, all this stuff kind of came together, to lead us to conclude it was the right thing to do now.
We have time for, we'll make it more than one more. James.
Well, first I want to say that it's nice to hear your story, because I'm actually at a company who's been bootstrapping themselves for about 8 years. Awesome. And we're actually looking at that Series A round. It's Graywall Software here in New Haven. Yeah. So that's positive. Quick kind of fun question. Coming from IBM, did you ask your company to switch over to IBM Bluemix?
It's funny. This is being recorded, huh? I should be careful what I say, because I still have a lot of friends at IBM. But I had grown to know at that point that what AWS had built was just kind of leaps and bounds ahead of everything else that was going on in cloud infrastructure in particular. And I had some old colleagues after I moved over kind of approach and say, "Hey, we should get you on." I think they'd done the SoftLayer acquisition at that point, and IBM was really trying to push in cloud. And it's just like, AWS is just the innovation engine that they've created, and the quality of the services that they provide, and the fact that the price points are deflationary, right? Their services get cheaper and cheaper every year. I mean, it's unbelievable. And it's another thing that makes it easier than ever to start a software company now, right? The fixed costs associated with that are really, really low. What you guys have built at Graywall is awesome. I know Suk, awesome team, and it's really impressive. It's tough work to bootstrap, right? But you guys have done a great job, so congratulations.
just wondering if, I don't know whether I should call you Core or Thermo at this point.
I'm not sure from day to day myself, actually.
I was just wondering if you're intending to maintain the same footprint in Connecticut, or if you'll be using a lot of shared services through the corporate company.
Yeah, so we are maintaining the same footprint in Connecticut. Actually, we're continuing to grow. So I actually have a call tomorrow morning with the real estate team starting to plot out the next expansion of our office. We will get leverage off of some other parts of Thermo Fisher. One of the nice things of being part of a big company is that there's a lot of infrastructure around to support, particularly back office processes that aren't strategic to what you do, but need to get done. HR, finance, right? Stuff like this. And so we're starting to get more integrated with some of those functions where we can get some extra help. But we always ran very lean on the admin side of the house. So there was no cost synergies at all in our acquisition business case. It's just all about growth. So we're staying here. We're going to keep growing here. We're going to keep growing elsewhere as well. All right, we're still hiring in remote sites also. But yeah, no, that's the path we're on.
We actually have time for a few more.
All right. With building software for specific companies in the early stages, did you have problems with the IP of the technology you were building that was customized for them that they didn't want to release to their competitors? Or was it a very common functionality across?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We'll often get into discussions with prospects during the sales process where they believe that the specific scientific workflow that they're doing and they want to configure in our system is very proprietary to them. And they want to retain IP rights around that, and that's a walk-away term for us, right? We will walk away from a deal if we can't own the IP associated with what we're building. We've been absolutely religious on that from throughout, and I think in the software industry, I think you kind of have to be that way, and most customers therefore understand that, right? So we've been very strict on that term. We've maintained ownership of all of our IP. And you know what? When it comes time to get acquired someday, you'll be very grateful that you did that, because if you've got messy IP issues, when a company comes calling and doing their due diligence, that can derail a deal, very quickly.
The people that work for startups are pretty unique. Do you believe that there are specific qualities that people, I guess, hold close to make them a person that would be someone to work for a startup?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I'd be interested what you guys think. I mean, I've met founders who come in kind of all shapes and sizes, right? And I mean, the obvious common denominator is a willingness to take significant risk, right? A belief in themselves, right? And what they can accomplish. And a real drive, right? I mean, you need to be incredibly driven to want to take on that challenge, right? If you're serious about it. But aside from that, I think anybody can be an entrepreneur from what I've seen. What do you guys think? Have you seen?
The one thing I've heard that separates the entrepreneurs that I've seen over the years is the willingness and ability to work full-time in your business when you're getting it off the ground. That's one differentiator that I know has been accounted for. Otherwise, from what I've seen, pretty much what you said all over the map.
Yeah, I think that says a lot. Back to drive, right? Like you need to be all in, right? It's really, really hard work, and doing it nights and weekends or spare time is, probably a recipe to not get a lot of traction.
You mentioned some ways for funding the startup. What do you think about some websites, fundraising websites like Kickstarter or something like that?
Yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at. I mean, I've participated in a couple Kickstarter campaigns, but I know there's a few others. Angel is still going, I think, right? And yeah, I haven't followed too closely. I think my sense is just from the little bit that I know, so I qualify it in that way. Can be a little tricky, right? I mean, managing a very wide and diverse investor base it's not something I'd want to do, right? Everyone who invests in your company, rightly, right, wants to understand what's going on and may have an opinion about what you're doing or how you should be doing it differently. And to a degree, I think that's really healthy and helpful. But taken to a degree, really heterogeneous, distributed investor base might be tough. But again, I'm not very educated on those models, so hesitate to offer an opinion.
Anything else you're working on either at Core or outside of work that you're excited and you want to share?
Oh gosh, sure. I mean, obviously I just mentioned I got 2 young kids who, I try to spend most of my free time hanging out with, but I do try to get involved in outside work initiatives as well. So I'm on a few different nonprofit boards, Board of the United Way here in New Haven, the board of the Connecticut Technology Council, which is like the trade group of a lot of tech companies in Connecticut who tries to do a lot of work to advocate for and stimulate growth in the technology industry. And then also I got Lindy's left, but her boss, the commissioner of the DCD, pulled me into an initiative around growing the tech talent base in the state of Connecticut as well, which is pretty important, I think, to us.
Awesome. That's really cool. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for coming.